Welcome to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires, the show where we talk about finding strength when life falls apart. I'm your host, Melie, and around here, resilience isn't perfection. It's falling flat, getting back up, and maybe laughing about it later. From breakups to breakthroughs, we mix faith, neuroscience, and a little sass to help you rebuild a life that actually feels like yours. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. Today, we're talking about a topic that I think is really universal: making decisions when fear is loud and the way forward feels unclear. We've all been there, at the fork in the road, overthinking our options, losing sleep, wondering if we're about to make the biggest mistake of our lives when really we're just deciding what to get for dinner. No shame if you've been in that boat. I have absolutely been there too. So resilience isn't about bouncing back when life knocks you down. It's about moving forward on purpose even when the ground feels shaky. And that requires making decisions. So today we're going to talk about how to make those decisions with faith, with a little neuroscience, and with a whole lot of grace for ourselves in the process. So let's start with this question. Why is it that decision-making feels so impossible sometimes, especially during those times when life has already been hard? The answer to that is part emotional and part biological. When we go through stress, grief, or trauma, our brains don't function the way they normally do. The amygdala, which, as you know, is your brain's little threat detector, can get really loud. It's kind of like a car alarm going off at every potential risk. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that helps you plan, weigh your options, and think long-term, goes quiet. So, when you're in survival mode, your brain literally pushes you towards safe, immediate comfort over long-term values-driven decisions. This is why decisions feel so high stakes after a big life change. Whether it's deciding to move, deciding to start dating again, or deciding to leave a job, your nervous system starts screaming, "Don't make the wrong choice." It's like you're in fight or flight mode while trying to plan your next 5 years. No wonder you're exhausted. I know that when I was mentally and emotionally just exhausted after my divorce, I didn't want to make any decisions. I felt like I didn't have the bandwidth for it. Even something that should have been somewhat simple, like choosing silverware and dishes, felt like a major chore and a major decision. Partly because I was still living in survival mode, and partly because the last time that I did that, I was with my ex and we were registering for gifts for our wedding. Trying to navigate that decision felt like it meant something big. And as I looked at the sea of options before me, I kind of zoned out. The reason for that is the more options we have, the harder it gets. Psychologists call this decision fatigue, where every choice depletes mental energy, which is why you can decide on something big, like taking a new job, for example, and then spend 45 minutes paralyzed in front of the refrigerator trying to pick out your lunch. When you're at a crossroads, there are usually two competing voices in your head: fear and faith. Fear says, stay safe, don't risk it, at least you know what you have now. And faith says, you might not know the whole path, but you know who walks with you. And both of those voices can feel very convincing in the moment. So how do you know which one to listen to? Here's one guiding question. Does this decision move me closer to my values and the person I want to become? If the answer is yes, even if it scares you, it might be a step of faith. Scripture gives us such a grounding reminder in Isaiah 30:21. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." God doesn't always hand us the full blueprint, but He does promise guidance for the next step. Now, here's something that can take a huge weight off. Not every big feeling decision is actually a big impact one. Some decisions feel enormous because our brains like to catastrophize. like deciding whether to go on a second date. It feels like, what if this is the wrong person? What if I waste my time? But really, you're just choosing whether to spend another hour sharing a meal. That's it. It's a small, low-impact decision our brains dress up in a tuxedo of anxiety. But contrast that with a big impact decision: leaving a marriage, changing careers, moving across the country. Those kinds of decisions actually shape the trajectory of your life. They require a different level of discernment, prayer, and wise counsel. So here's a practical framework you can use when you come up against both low-impact and high-impact decisions. For low-impact decisions, try loosening your grip. Just try it and adjust if needed. For high-impact decisions, slow down, pray, journal, seek wise counsel. Look at your values and long-term goals, and, very importantly, don't rush God's timeline. So, in my own life, when I started dating after my divorce, I would make what is a low-impact decision that I already mentioned earlier, deciding to go on a second date, into this super high-impact decision and would get all in my head about it. The decision when it comes to whether to go on a second date with someone is simply this: do you like that person enough to see them at least one more time? But in my mind and in my head, as I was navigating this right after my divorce, probably way too soon after my divorce, I was in my head about the future and compatibility. I'm not saying that if you see areas of major incompatibility that you should ignore that, certainly not. But it's important to give things space and time, especially if you're not sure. You can't possibly know someone well enough after one date to decide whether you want to spend your life with them. But deciding whether you'd like to have a coffee or another dinner with them is a much easier decision. So here's a reflection question that I'd love you to consider. What decision in your life right now feels huge, but might actually just be the next experiment? And what decision in your life right now truly needs deep discernment? So now let's talk a little bit more about some resilient decision-making tools. How do we actually make resilient choices? And I'm talking about choices that don't come from our fear or survival mode. I'm going to tell you about 4 tools that I use all the time in my decision-making, and use whichever of these feel best to you. So number 1 is name the fear. Science shows us that naming your fear actually calms the amygdala. So if you're afraid of something, say it out loud. For example, I'm afraid of failing, or I'm afraid I'll regret this decision. Naming it helps to shrink it. Number 2 is play the long game. Ask, if I look back in 5 years, which choice will I wish I made? This can shift you out of short-term panic and into big-picture thinking. 3 is a faith-driven pause. Sometimes the wisest move is to wait. Just sit with scripture, pray, journal, give God space to speak. And number 4, run it by your safe circle. Don't crowdsource from the internet. Ask a few trusted people who share your values and care about your growth, not just your comfort. And another tool that you can add to your decision-making toolbox is the pro and con list. Sometimes this is called the Ben Franklin method, which I think is just great because apparently I'm related to him, but it's been around for centuries and it still works for good reason. So what you do is you literally list out on a piece of paper or computer or your phone or whatever a list of pros and a list of cons. For example, if you're considering applying for new jobs, pros could be potential for higher pay, a work environment that suits you, a better PTO policy. Cons might be time-consuming, need to brush up on interview skills, fear of the unknown. And here is why it works. Researchers have found that as a person moves from considering change to taking action, the pros begin to outweigh the cons, shifting the balance toward growth and action. Also, naming and listing pros and cons gives your logical brain space to step in, which can help you overcome emotions where feelings like fear or excitement might actually skew your judgment. And since modern decision-making research really emphasizes the idea that deliberate, conscious thought works much better over just random trust your gut decisions, using a written list can help you engage your prefrontal cortex instead of leaning on emotional-only based decision-making. So here's how to do the pro and con list well. Number 1, just write the decision at the top of the page. Number 2, you create 2 columns, pros on the left, cons on the right. And you can do this, like I said, on your phone, on a computer. I personally love doing this on a real piece of paper. I love to write with a real pen, real paper, but that's just me. So you create those columns, pros on the left, cons on the right. And then you fill those columns out. List every benefit and drawback you can think of. Do not censor yourself in this exercise. Write it all down. And an optional step that you can take is maybe assign a score to each item on the list. Maybe you go 1 being least important to 5 being most important to each item in the pros and cons, and then that way you can tally that up and help see which side is actually coming out stronger. You also want to look for items that cancel each other out. So, for example, on one side, if you've put value flexibility versus may feel unstable, you might want to subtract and simplify as advised by behavioral theorists. So what does the pro and con list do? Well, it builds clarity and space between your emotion and your reasoning. It helps reveal when you're overweighing negatives out of fear, maybe a status quo bias. It allows room for prayer, reflection, and God's perspective to settle in. And here's an example from my own life. So as I've mentioned before on the podcast, I actually almost a couple of years ago made a complete career pivot. So I had to make a decision. I had been laid off and I could try to find a job in the same field or I could try to get into a new field. So for that pivot, my cons list included career pivots can be scary. It included it might be less income for now and also fear of failure. But my pros list had things like alignment with values, long-term growth, and the ability to lean into my strengths. Seeing those things side by side helped me and God to point me toward faith. So if you're facing a decision right now, would you take 5 minutes after you're done listening to this episode to write out a pro and con list? Then I want to encourage you to pray over each item. Ask God to show you whether a con is simply a fear or whether it's a real risk worth noting. And a side note here, if you are listening to this with an ADHD brain, I want to talk with you specifically. Decision-making can feel even heavier because ADHD impacts the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that organizes, prioritizes, and sees future consequences clearly. This means choices can feel overwhelming, not because you're incapable, but because your brain has a harder time sorting options and anticipating outcomes. But here are some things that can help. You can use external structures. So don't rely on your brain alone. Make that pro and con list. Make it visual. Use visual charts. Talk it out with a trusted friend. Set decision deadlines for small choices. It helps prevent endless spiraling. Break big decisions into smaller experiments. Instead of, should I completely change careers, maybe try making the decision, can I take one class in that field to help me assess whether it's for me or not? And be sure to celebrate your progress over perfection. Your goal isn't the perfect decision, it's to move forward faithfully. And most importantly, give yourself grace. This is something that I have had to learn with my ADHD brain as well. An ADHD brain is not broken. It just needs a different decision-making toolkit. And here's a bonus. When you're in doubt, just try a small experiment. Instead of quitting your job tomorrow, take a class in the new field you're curious about. Instead of deciding if someone's the one on date 1, just ask yourself, would I like another conversation with them? Resilience loves baby steps. And now let's talk about those moments when there just simply isn't a clear answer, because that is often the hardest. But here's hope. God isn't waiting there to punish you for picking the wrong path. If you're walking in faith, He promises that all things work for your good, even the imperfect steps that we take. Sometimes resilience means simply choosing and moving forward, trusting that God can redirect us as needed. It's better than living stuck in a roundabout of indecision forever. So today we've talked about why decisions feel so hard after hardship, how to tell the difference between big feeling and truly big impact choices, and how to use both neuroscience and faith to move forward with resilience. Here is my challenge for you. Write down one decision that you have been avoiding and ask yourself, is this low stakes or is it truly life-shaping? And then take one small, faithful step forward. Resilient decision-making isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing faith over fear, one brave step at a time. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. If this episode helped you, could you share it with someone who's also facing a hard choice? And as always, keep looking for the diamonds in your dumpster fires. Chat with you next time. That's a wrap on this episode of Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. If you're walking through the ashes right now, remember, you're not broken. You are becoming. Don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend who needs it, and come back next week for more faith, honesty, and a whole lot of heart. See you next time.